Call the meeting to order. Mike, start recording. Thank you very much. Try not to leave the meeting. Let's see here. And so coming to order at 7:02 of the regular meeting of the Town of Ashford Planning and Zoning Commission for July 10th, 2023. Again, at 7:02. We have a full boat of members. I just want to I see Luther has joined also. And I know Doug is on as an alternate. Is John Calarise on? I don't see the name. Okay, very good. We'll move forward. Doug and Luther, thank you for joining. We also have with us tonight Ken Slater from Halloran and Sage, our legal counsel. There's a couple of items he'll be bringing us up to speed on, giving us some input on that, especially one of them that we had requested regarding some of the moratorium language. So we're all set with call to order and seating of alternates. Approval of minutes from the meeting of June 12th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve before there's any type of discussion or anything?
Motion to approve. Jerry.
Jerry?
I'll second.
Alex seconds. Any discussion? Issues, problems, corrections? All those in favor of accepting the minutes of June 12th, 2023, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain. I wasn't on the last call. Mark Schnobel.
Mark Schnobel abstains,
I'll abstain also, Jeff.
and Jeff Schillinger. Are we good, Valerie?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to check. And thank you again. You're doing a really, really great job in capturing the information in the minutes. A number of the members have mentioned that. And I just wanted to give you your due process. You're really doing a great job for us. Thank you. Okay, moving on to public comments. Is there anyone from the public wishing to make a comment for this evening? I see Christina Sebo with a hand up. Christine, please go right ahead.
Yes. Hi, Christina Sebo, 91 Perry Hill Road, Ashford. I have a question. When the commission holds discussions about revising or updating the regulations for the IID zone, how can the public have input into that? Or can we?
Well, as we said earlier, what we're hoping to do is to do that in conjunction with the POCD. And we will be seeking public input as part of our discussion with Loretta tonight from the Conservation Commission, as well as a number of other commissions and boards putting together an ad hoc committee on that. So first and foremost, we'll probably reach out to those committees with an interest and would want to send a member or representative to that. And again, that would include updates to some of the zonings on some of the areas that are identified in the POCD, such as the IID zone.
Okay, so it will be via that process.
We'll reach out there, but if someone has expressed to us, I mean, I honestly don't think a committee of 50 people, if there's 50 people that are interested, is going to be very effective. Okay, especially when it comes to the fact that the POCD is divided up into certain areas, and the input from the Conservation Commission on the education might not be all that effective. So it's not something the whole town can give its input on, but we would put together a select group of ad hoc members with interest, and ideally gaining those from maybe some of the more involved committees.
Okay, but so as I'm understanding, the POCD, that will have public input because people who want to be involved will be involved. But then when you go to revise the regulations, that's actually, I mean, it's a linked process, but it's sort of separate. So is the public able to put input into that? Is my
Well,
question.
Yeah,
Really,
Jeff,
it's,
this is Dick. If I could try to address that a little bit, using as example, the way we've revised the regulations in the past.
Mhm.
Usually a smaller group of people it's got to get together and drafted a proposed set of regulations that is then sent to the commission. And then those regulations are discussed line by line in detail with the commission at one of the regular commission meetings. So the public would be more than welcome to, just as you're sitting in on this meeting, to sit in on one of the meetings where the regulations would be discussed.
well, the only thing on that, Dick, though, is that, again, Christine is sharing with us during public comment.
Right.
When it comes to the board discussing the regulations and such like that, it's usually not an open discussion along those lines unless it's been identified. It would come to a point of we put the regulations we feel to take forward to the public, and then it goes to a public hearing.
Okay, okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine.
Mr.
Trying to
Chair,
learn.
Yes, Jenny, you have a comment?
yeah, I believe that the public is always welcome to submit written communication to us. Is that not correct?
Absolutely. We always take in correspondence, obviously, for public comment and such too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jeff, this is Dick again. I don't see a good place to insert it into the agenda, but we were working on the affordable housing plan way back many meetings ago.
Mhm.
And to my knowledge, it's never been finalized or discussed. Can we add that to the agenda someplace under the old business?
It is, I mean, just as that is something we have to deal with, and really got put on the back burner due to the hearings we had with the text amendment application that we went through. We also have alternative energy and the solar and things like that that we have to deal with also. I would prefer that if we brought those items up on the next agenda and put it first and foremost for, yeah, I would say unfinished business, yes.
Yeah, I may be wrong on this, but I believe we're coming up against the deadline for having the affordable housing plan finished.
We're actually past the deadline.
Yeah, that's what
Along with 100 and some odd other towns across the,
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I was gonna say that, but I wasn't absolutely sure of the date, but
yeah. And
we are
the
behind.
the other item too is there's been a lot of movement back and forth with some of the legislation recently, and I think we'd like to get Mike to get his head around that and maybe share that with us, and or Ken for that matter, when it comes to the status of affordable housing. Because again, there were some items that were trying to get pushed through in July that did or then became or didn't, but then became studies and such, and I mean the fair share housing and things like that. So there's a lot of upheaval still before we hammer out, I think, a full plan. But we do need to move forward with that. I absolutely agree with you.
Okay, so it'll be on the next meeting's agenda.
I would think I think it'd be great to put it on the next agenda. Anyone else from public comment? Okay, thank you very much. Bills, Mike or Alex, any bills?
I don't have any. No bills on my end.
No bills. And any correspondence at this point?
None.
None for Alex. For Mike.
Nope.
Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is it's not even the resuming the public hearing. We had delayed opening the public hearing for the primary, the definition of primary residence regarding our short-term rentals and PZ 23-7. Along those lines, Ken has given us some information or has some information to share with us when it comes to short-term rentals overall. I would recommend to the commission now that we pull our application for the text amendment regarding primary residence until we've spoken to Ken, or Ken has spoken to us regarding the nature of this and what that entails and its effect on planning and zoning commissions and what their purview are. So what we can do then is potentially have a motion, basically looking for a motion to pull our application for a hearing regarding primary residence, definition of primary residence language, and then also have a motion to add at the probably we could put it under unfinished business is the discussion on short-term rental regulations in general that Ken would then be able to share with us. So could I gain a motion to pull our application for primary residence definition at this time?
I move.
Okay. I'll second.
Alex second. Who moved? I'm sorry.
I did.
Oh, he looked at you, but he can't hear you or see you.
I'm sorry.
Wait a
Who's
minute,
making-
who moved it?
Who's making the motion?
You were circled there. You
What?
were.
Excuse me, Mr. and Mrs. Staubach, or whoever, you're not a member of the commission. Ideally, you'd be muted on this. Thank you. Okay, is there a member of commission? I've got a second. I need a first motion on this, please.
I'll make a first motion.
Alex has motioned to
Okay, I will
pull our application.
resend our application.
Okay, is there a second?
second,
Jerry
Jerry.
seconds it. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Okay, moving on to number 7, unfinished business, PZ-23-7. Text amendment application to Article 300-4, townwide temporary moratorium on warehouses, distribution centers, research facilities, including research and development, testing, laboratories or centers, applicant Charles Vidic. So in our last meeting, we had a motion that basically asked us to look at have legal counsel and our zoning enforcement officer take a look at the moratorium language and do a review on it. And Mike has since sent out a edited version of this and did send it out to the members. Mike, I don't know if you want to call that up or how you want to do that.
I can if you want me to, sure.
Yeah, why don't you call that up? And while you're at it, if you could get not a split screen, but have the original application available to us too, that would be great. Whoops, where'd it go?
Okay, let me see if I can do both.
Or I don't know if that's easier or if the staff memo might be easier to deal with. Oh, that's what you're calling up, right?
Yeah, I can, I'm not sure if it's gonna let me do a side by side.
Don't worry. You can, if you flip back and forth, that's fine too.
Okay. Screen share. So do you want me to just do a quick, like high level explanation of what is and isn't here, or?
Yeah, sure. If you're comfortable with that, you or me, you're fine. Please do.
So, and Ken can also chime in here if I'm leading anybody astray. But really there were some questions and obviously a lot of discussion at the last meeting and previously about what the process would involve if the moratorium application was approved as originally written. And when I started thinking about this a little bit more, and what caused me to want to ultimately discuss this with Ken and make sure we had a clear path forward, was the language as written had a very specific intent. There were a number of things that the commission was going to consider, and that's where that original list came from. And I think you can boil the process down to the commission was going to endeavor to enact a temporary moratorium to review the regulations for considerations, which I would say all boil down to the environment, right? We were going to look at coverage, we were going to look at uses and all these other things, but it was all with environmental and site preservation or conservation in mind, and some concern about not knowing where the commission was going to land, but having a very specific intent for the reason why the moratorium was adopted, getting to a point where you're at the end of your review of the regulations and where you feel like you want to go does not align with the original intent behind why the moratorium was suggested to the commission. So what this does, what I'll say this attempts to do, is basically make the moratorium, it changes the timeline a little bit. I have it in here as 9 months, only because I felt like 6 months was a little bit too short, but 12 months, I don't know, sometimes people think 12 months, we've got all the time in the world and it creeps up on you. But other than that,
Keep the pressure on. I like that.
we dialed it to apply only to the IID because there was some concern or some question as to if this applies across everybody in town all over the place. So it would apply to just the IID. It would apply to developments within the IID in excess of 25,000 square feet or with more than 50 parking spaces. That really was created as a springboard for discussion, but wanting to not limit any development or redevelopment in the area because there are some businesses existing in the IID. And the other sort of thing you'll find mostly missing from this is just those major items of intent from the original application. And the reason for that is that we wanted to keep the scope of what the commission would do during the moratorium more broad, so that you can consider and review and evaluate any number of things. So it doesn't change what you can do. It doesn't mean that you can't adopt regulations, which would be more restrictive at the end of the moratorium. It doesn't mean you can't add uses or subtract uses or do all of the things that were originally suggested. It just leaves the intent a little bit more neutral so that you can operate with a little more flexibility as you go through that evaluation process. And the time frame, the limitation on just the IID, this application to just the 25,000 square feet or 50, those are things that you can modify further. I just wanted to create a place for you to start your discussion. And with that, I'll pause.
Thank you, Mike. And again, Mike did a nice job with that. Considering the application and going through the hearing and the input that we got regarding the application for the text amendment, It's almost like in looking at the document itself, the first part is accurate, few tweaks in there, but the first part really discusses what the moratorium is. When you get into the list of the items, the bulleted points that Mike was talking about, you really got into the how to do it. And the how to do it, well, these are excellent suggestions for the commission to look into. It's really not part of the moratorium itself, the actionable piece itself. It's really the how to we would use to consider evaluating the IAD zone for potential development going further. And as Mike said, the items he has in here are really talking points. 25,000 square feet, which is a little bit larger than what we currently have in there now at 20,000. And the parking spaces according to that based on its square footage and size. So with that, I open it up for discussion regarding this proposal and suggested motion to the
Mr.
members.
Chair, if I could comment briefly before the commission jumps
Oh,
in.
please do, Ken, please do. I'm sorry, I forgot.
No,
you
no, no
were
problem at
ahead.
all. I just wanted to endorse Mike's perspective that it's best that the commission, by keeping the moratorium neutral in terms of what you'll actually accomplish, it gives you a full free hand. It does not mean that you will not consider each and every one of the bullet points that were in the application that was filed for a moratorium. You can consider those. You can consider others. But what it's ideal is to not decide in advance what your regulations might have in them in the next 9 months or whatever period you adopt. You just give yourself the free hand to look at all those issues and decide what to do and leave out of a motion like this any kind of signal of what the end product's going to look like, because that's really what the purpose of the moratorium is you're going to spend time evaluating it and deciding all the things that are important, how they should be included. So it would be premature to suggest at the time of the moratorium exactly what the commission's going to do. That's what you're going to use the moratorium. So I just wanted to chime in briefly to endorse, Mike's suggestion that it be drafted in a more neutral way, which does not affect your ability to consider any and all of the reasons that were put forth in the application, as well as anything that you might bring up yourselves as you talk it through. So I think it's appropriate for the commission to do that in this fashion, as Mike suggested, in a more neutral way. So I just wanted to chime in on that.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, I don't see where to raise my hand, Jeff, but I wanted to go back over what we discussed at the last meeting, and we didn't want to have a vote on the proposed moratorium because we wanted to consult with Ken first. I don't believe we had agreed that a moratorium like the one proposed by Mr. Vidic and the new one that has now been proposed and written up by Mike. I think the real question is, do we need to have a moratorium every time we rewrite land use regulations on the thing that we're rewriting, Ken? We rewrote our land use regulations in the past. Well, there was no moratoriums at all.
Mr. Chair.
Please go right ahead, Ken.
The times where moratoriums are most important is when the town is vulnerable for typically applications that are as of right, that the commission would have no discretion but to approve. So you put a pause on it, and then you consider adopting regulations that would afford some discretion to prevent something from proceeding. So that a regulation or that a use that has, there's already has some discretion, like a special permit use, et cetera, it's not as critical to have it. So no, I would not recommend that you always adopt the moratorium every time you're going to dive into doing your regulations. But if you feel some level of concern that an application could be filed that would that you might have to be required to approve, that might not be acceptable, and that you might make the regulations stronger, well, that's the context in which a moratorium may be appropriate. So it's kind of how much risk you think exists right now. If the regulations, the way they're stated right now, don't put the town at much risk. But the other, in addition to risk, if it involves a great deal of energy of getting consultants and things of that sort to evaluate an application of a particular type that would come in, but for specific standards, that might be another instance where a moratorium might make sense, so that you could obviate the need if you were going to have to get all kinds of experts or consultants to address a topic that might be regulated by more specific details. You could kind of put a pause in and adopt those standards. So, there are some instances where it's just, do you need a pause? Are there risks to the town if you don't? And those are the times where a moratorium makes a lot of sense. But to your point, it's not necessary to adopt the moratorium every time you want to tackle making some reg changes.
Yeah, and to that point, Ken, we at present do not have any application for any development at the interstate interchange area. So there is no regular permit or special permit, on the table for discussion or any use. The only thing that we have open is this proposal in front of us that we voted to consult with you first relative to having a moratorium. So,
That's true, but a moratorium would be if you filed the moratorium after an application was filed, it would be too late for that application. So yes, it's true that there aren't any. The question is the town vulnerable to some application that could be put on the table under the existing regulations? If it doesn't feel it's vulnerable because it has discretion to deal with whatever's filed, but meanwhile might want to make its regulations better, stronger, different, then a moratorium is not necessary. But if the commission feels as though there's some vulnerability that something could be filed when it should have an opportunity to control the I'll call it the narrative, but control the process with your own set of regulations, then that's a situation where if your commission is resolved to try to tackle a particular kind of regulation, if you wanted to give yourself that kind of protection against any vulnerability of the new application to come in, a moratorium can make sense.
What Mike has written here restricts the land use applications that are presently in the regulations. For instance, he's proposing that we limit the size of a development to 25,000 square feet and no more than 50 parking spaces. That is much more restrictive than what is existing in the present regulation.
So I want to clarify that what I'm suggesting is that any development that is proposed to be less than 25,000 square feet or has less than 50 parking spaces would not be subject to the moratorium. So if an existing property owner or existing building wanted to do some development on their property and they needed 40 parking spaces, we would not tell them, well, hold on, come back in 9 months and we'll see where things land. So this really what this is trying to do is get to the concerns related to large projects without bringing everything to a halt, because we have not had any real feedback from the property owners in the zone to know if there's something that may be pending that we wouldn't want to unnecessarily prohibit over the next 6, 9, or 12 months. But it's just for the terms of the moratorium, not a regulation.
And it is less restrictive than the current applied for moratorium also. It makes it less restrictive.
Yeah, and I think we have a first order of business for the commission is, do we accept or reject the application for the moratorium that has been submitted. And we put that on hold, pending a conversation with Ken. So that's step one. Then comes the next step. Does the Planning and Zoning Commission on its own want to institute a moratorium?
Well, I would leave this to Ken, but I believe the changes that we are looking to do aren't out of scope or well above the scope of the current application that's out there. We've just adjusted some of the information in putting out, putting something out for the commission to look at and potentially vote on or agree for.
I'd
Ken?
agree with that. I mean, the problem with notice, if you wanted to treat this as basically an amendment to what was been applied for, the real test is the commission ultimately going to be taking an action that the general public would have no expectation, that they would be doing? And somebody files an application to change a zone to business, and in the course of the public hearing, it changes it to industrial. I mean, that's something that nobody in the public, if somebody said, oh, that commercial use, a commercial zone there would be just fine, I'm not even going to go to the hearing. The next thing they find out when they look in the newspaper is it was changed to an industrial use. That's something that's outside of the sort of the four corners of the application. In this case, the application was for a moratorium. It had a lot of detailed language in there, but if the commission ultimately were to essentially amend what was proposed by taking some of that detail out and being more general, it falls within the scope of what was applied for. So there wouldn't be a need for an entirely new application if you wanted to treat it that way.
Thank you, Ken. Mark, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on what Dick was saying. I mean, if I'm reading it correctly, our current regulations for 5-acre minimum or greater allow for 20,000 to 250,000 square foot facility, and this moratorium would limit that to 25,000. Is that correct?
That is what's, as Mike put out, that was kind of even a potential starting point, discussion point.
So we're looking
put
to
out
be
that
more,
change.
so we're looking to be 10 times more strict than our current regulations allow.
Well, what we're dealing with, though, just to be clear, what we're dealing with is the moratorium, the application that was put in as the moratorium, the original one.
Correct.
What we've done is looked at it, changed some of the scope on it within reason, but still allow for activity to take place in there. Now, again, if the commission feels that and again, I'm sure this is the point that Mike was making, is that if 25,000 is too restrictive from the original 250,000 that's currently in the regs, is there a number somewhere in between that the commission is comfortable to still allow for development, but not cause something to go in that restricts us when we go back and look at our regs? Because we are going back to look at the regs on this again to work with the POCD, as I said. But if we put something in there, that would need to be grandfathered because we end up changing our regs that are less than 250,000 or whatever the situation is. We've limited ourselves. The moratorium doesn't limit ourselves except for the 9 months of the moratorium.
No, I understand.
Okay.
And that's what
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no,
Mark.
I just was looking for clarification because I think that's pretty restrictive.
Janet.
Oh, thank you. I was going to say, I agree with Dick that we don't necessarily need a moratorium every time we change our regulations. However, I do think this is a special case because, as we heard in all of our hearings, there are a huge number of concerns in developing this property, whether it's the water, the traffic, the type of soil under the area. And I think it would behoove us to not allow development until we decide how we want to regulate it.
Luther,
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to start by asking clarification. I just have a question to ask. I know I'm not seated, and if it's not appropriate for me to ask a question because we're out of public hearing, that's fine. I'm happy to just sit by.
please go ahead, Luther.
Okay, so the question I have regarding the language that we've been provided by staff, or that the commission's been provided by staff. So the original application is for a moratorium on specific uses, warehousing, distribution centers, things of that nature. Can we get an understanding? To the best of my knowledge, none of those uses are currently permitted in the IID zone, which we're considering restricting this application to only having effect in the IID zone. So does it become a moot point to have a moratorium against a use that isn't currently permitted in that zone? And would it be appropriate at all? And I guess I'm just looking for that information and clarification.
Being terribly candid with what you just said, yeah, I was originally of a mind of, are we over legislating, if you will? Because as you said, they currently aren't allowable uses in that zone. And what are you putting a moratorium on something? But I think by putting the moratorium on, what we get away from is, if you will, wasting our time with applications before we know exactly what we're doing with the IID zone.
Because again, just to clarify why I'm asking this, it would appear as though would be a moratorium against permits for development, but not a moratorium against regulatory applications for language change. And so that would be the first step in anyone trying to do one of these developments in this zone, if it's not currently zoned for these uses, if I'm not mistaken. So it just seems like this is a debate about a moratorium against uses that are already not permitted, and seems to be redundant. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, it's not a group seeking a special permit. It's looking to moratorium on applications for such use.
Correct, but if the use isn't permitted, and we're
Well,
putting
we just went through this with the
Yeah.
use that wasn't permitted, and we spent 4 or 5 months on it.
Right, but that was a text amendment change, not an actual application for use. So I guess my question is, does this moratorium address someone coming in and putting in a text amendment change request? And if it doesn't, then it doesn't prohibit the process that we just went through. Because having a moratorium against development, if it doesn't also apply to moratorium against applications for language change of regulations, then there's nothing to stop someone from filing a similar application as before. And so I guess that's the question that I would maybe ask Ken to weigh in on is there even really standing for a moratorium against a use that is not currently permitted?
Thank you. Ken?
I don't want to answer the question with a question, but I am going to for 1 second. And Mike, I'm trying to, the language that you had proposed pertains to any application, doesn't it?
It pertains to developments based upon size and does not deal with the specific use, because frankly, the part of the public hearing from the previous application included some discussion and question about what is included within the current regs, what is not included within the current regs, what the current uses within the IID cover and what they do not cover. And absent the definition of some of these uses, do you like, for example, a special permit use in the IID 1 is manufacturing. So without a clear definition of some of the uses within the proposed moratorium, you end up debating whether or not a specific use falls under a listed category. So I moved away from the uses, and it's just based upon size.
Thanks, Mike. And so to directly answer your question, Luther, you're absolutely right. If something is perfectly clearly not allowed in the regulations, it would be pointless to do a moratorium because they're not allowed. But as Mike just commented on, there with some concern that there might be some ambiguity in terms of certain kinds of uses, and that the regulations need to be tightened up. Those, when I was talking earlier about vulnerability, if there's some concern that someone might be able to exploit the lack of detail or definitions or that sort of thing, and that you'd be well served to take a deep breath and clarify and make your regulations more detailed, et cetera, then it is appropriate. But if it were clearly related to something that's not allowed in the first place, then it really wouldn't make a lot of sense. The other element is, and in terms of policy change, you're the legislative body. So, you put this moratorium in place, you'd have the discretion to eliminate the moratorium or if in a short window of time you realize there's no changes are needed, you can get rid of that. So it's really a matter of, is there enough ambiguity, enough concern that someone might be able to exploit that and file an application before you have a chance to potentially tighten all of that up. That would be a valid reason for a moratorium. If the regulations are tight as is, and this is a use that the commission would never allow to be permitted, then the moratorium would be overkill. But it seems that from Mike's perspective and looking at the regulations, that there is some degree of vulnerability that might make it worth taking a pause and looking at those regulations. But if suddenly a developer shows up and has got something that clearly was something that was not problematic, but got affected by the breadth of this moratorium, and they wanted to proceed with the project, your commission can always come back and modify this moratorium as well, and clarify that. It just gives you an opportunity to take a pause and look at things if there is some concern that there's some vulnerability in the regulations that someone might be able to exploit before you had a chance to deal with it.
Thank you, Ken. Any further discussion or questions or input from the commission?
Jeff, I can't seem to find on the screen where I raised my hand, so I apologize for just jumping in. One of the mistakes, I made the first pass on the regulations that we have currently in the in print, and I also was the chairman of the development of the plan of conservation and development that is currently in place. One thing we didn't go through and change was the section, the general provision section, which called out that if it's not listed, it's not covered. On page 35 of the plan of conservation and development, it lists out the actions that would be taken to try to determine what is the viable things that we could encourage development, commercial and industrial, at Interstate exit 72. It was always envisioned that we would not list everything that could possibly be there, that we would find out what made sense to someone that would be interested in developing there. For instance, someone said a while back, couldn't we put a Whole Foods at exit 72? The commission might like to have a Whole Foods there, and maybe some people in town would like that. But unless a developer is willing to spend their money to develop something to put it into that exit, it's not going to happen. So it was the intent of the people that developed the POCD. And when I wrote the regulations, that we would be open to things that were not necessarily listed as permitted uses. The general idea would be, it would be, large scale commercial and or industrial developments that would be feasible for that area. So when we say that it's not listed, a warehouse is not a listed, use, it was never intended that that be a restricted. If someone wanted to put something in, they could apply for a special permit, and then that use could be considered at that point by the commission. So, it's not like we have intentionally prohibited warehouses or research facilities. And if you look at the language, you could infer, since it is a special permitted use for office space for research, so that it is pretty much within there. So, this whole, we're dissecting this thing way too much than what I think is really, the intent of those that develop these regulations in the plan of conservation and development. Okay, if we want to turn, exit 72 into a park, we ought to take and raise money so that the town can buy it.
Okay, Dick. So, I think that does go to show, some of the ambiguity that Mike was talking about when it came to, it does say manufacturing, and, we talk industrial and we talk manufacturing. And I know there was discussion when it came to the public hearings on the IID zone and the application that was out there for whether warehousing was included, specifically left out when it came to a usable function for that area. So, again, what I think we're really looking to do here, or what is being offered up to the commission, is an ability, as Ken was stating, to put a pause on activity. And yeah, I know we wrote the other, or you worked very, very hard and put together changes to the other residential, agricultural regs and such of that. But it didn't quite, pardon me?
And we
And
also,
commercial.
and the
Yeah.
commercial and
Yeah.
industrial, we went through all that whole section. We didn't go into the general provisions where we find there is a conflict, like in the definitions, section, we took out all the lists of types of manufacturing. We should have said manufacturing. And so, in this, again,
Which does open it up to ambiguity as to what some people think of manufacturing and other people think of manufacturing.
right. But the idea is it's all done with a special permit. So therefore the commission has the ability to weigh in on it. We also, if it's a large development, we have the escrow of funds required to the town to do studies and the like to support the application. So, I mean, there's a lot of place there to do things. It's,
I guess the concern that I'll raise, the concern that I have is, and it kind of goes to, earlier what, kind of what Ken talked about. If you put the moratorium in afterwards, it's too late. If we sit back on our heels and wait for an application to come in and react to application, if it's not right, which again is what the POCD tries to identify from the community as to what's right for going into certain areas or what the community wants. If we allow something to go in that doesn't meet the needs that we've identified, or just again, somewhat there's ambiguity between what it should or should not go in there, then it's too late. If it comes to a special permit that goes in and they meet all the requirements for special permit, we have no control over that. We can put in as many requirements as we want, as long as it doesn't feel being punitive in any way. You know, but we are limited to that application meeting all the special permitting requirements.
Yeah, well, yeah, Jeff, let me just,
Oh, my God. Oh, God.
Did I hurt your hand there, Valerie? I'm sorry.
No, no, sorry.
okay, on page 35 of the POCD,
Yes, I have it right in
Yeah.
front of me.
okay, there's 3 objectives, and I'll just go the top line. The first is determine the reason why the area has remained undeveloped and determine how best to attract businesses to that area. Then the next one says secure strong, sustainable commercial and or industrial development. And then the third one is coordinate the compatible development of the spa so we don't impact the surrounding areas. But the idea is to do a study which the Economic Development Commission has been doing informally for the past couple of years to determine, talking to the people that own that property, what we could be done to help them develop something that would be viable. So, I mean, it was never meant that you can only have this occupancy and that occupancy. It was to determine what is necessary to be successful at that area, so we can develop it. So I guess I'll simply shut up at this point, because this is something we can probably better address when we have a smaller subcommittee developing what we would put forth, and then present that as we have in the past to the full commission.
Mark, you have your hand up?
I did. It seems to me that this proposal for a moratorium is based on, you know, the earlier public hearings we had about changing our regulations to allow mega warehouses. And during those public hearings, I don't recall significant outrage about our current regulations allowing up to 250,000 square feet. So I personally find that this proposal of 25,000 square feet isn't appropriate. I mean, I'm not sure where it's coming from, because that certainly wasn't the outrage that I heard in the town. What I heard in the town was outrage on mega warehouses, signs all over town about, you know, structures 1 million square feet and above. I didn't see outrage about a structure of 250,000 square feet. In fact, as I recall, people were wondering why they couldn't develop the property within our current regulations. So I don't see that this moratorium is warranted.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Janet? You're on mute. It's okay.
Trying not to make extra noise here.
We're gonna have t-shirts made for everybody. You're on mute. Go ahead.
Dick mentioned that one of the points was compatible development. I think that is one of the big issues here, is what kind of development, what size is compatible with that area, considering the water and all the other issues there, and what kind of regulations do we need to put in place to protect it. So I think we need to do a lot of research and get some expert opinion on these things before we say, okay, you can build something. And a 250,000 square foot building is very large, and it's going to have roads and impervious surfaces and a lot of water runoff. And I don't think that we have currently enough protections in place, and whether we could put them in place with a special permit, I think is questionable as well. So I think a moratorium is really a good idea. And I think in the end, hopefully we can come up with something that will protect the area and allow development. And as I said at the last meeting, it would be more fair to developers because they'd understand what we want. So they can come forward with a proposal that would hopefully be successful.
Okay, thank you. Any other input from the commission?
I'll find the hand raised eventually, but if we put a moratorium and stop the development per what's already in the existing regulation, if someone were to have bought property, reading our regulations, and then we now change the regulation after that party bought the property, assuming that those regulations would be in place, Ken, does that leave us liable, for damages?
No, I mean, your commission, when you adopted regulations in the very first instance, people weren't regulated at all and own their land. And so if someone buys regulations under, but hasn't actually filed for an application to develop them, or does not have any, if they had an application approved, they'd have protections under the statutes to be able to proceed with that approval. So the fact that somebody expects changes will not come to a regulation does not expose the town. The town adopted a regulation. Now, I'm not saying that the town can't do things inappropriately and be subject to, appeal, et cetera, but the fact that someone currently owns land not expecting that the regulations are going to be changed, that's not a basis that would subject the town to liability if the town decided to, whether with a moratorium or whether without a moratorium, and 2 months down the road somebody proposes on the commission, let's make a change to a certain section of the regulations, that does not expose the town.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, so seems like we've got a couple of options on the table. One obviously is to, we would need a motion to accept, motion to deny, whatever. The moratorium itself, either as written or, for that matter, with Mike's changes to it. An offshoot of that is, as Mike said, he put those numbers out there as a starting point. The commission would need to figure out, is it simply the moratorium itself that, based kind of on what Luther was saying, is that is already legislated, based on as a allowable use that isn't allowed, or do we address the amended moratorium and change some of the numbers, giving it up to the full 250,000, which again Janet has expressed as a concern, just something the size of FedEx going in there while we are trying to decide on what we want to do or what's best for the community to do with that land. So I'm open to hearing a motion. I'm open to hearing more discussion based on those points. Obviously we can edit Mike's input for the moratorium. I think if we were to go with a moratorium, obviously it is much more applicable than the original application that came through. And but I leave that up to the commission and discussion and or moving forward.
Yeah, Mike, I'd like to address things in 2 steps. First, we have a proposal by Mr. Vittich. It's as he wrote it. I think we should vote either to accept that as it is or deny it as it is, as one separate motion. Then I would think the second item would be, do we take what Mike has written separately proposed by the commission? Do we modify it, accept it, or reject it? But I think we first have to act upon the submittal by Mr. Vidic that is in front of the commission.
Can I just add two quick things? One, procedurally, I don't think you can do it that way, because my proposal is effectively a modification of the original application. And so you can't deny the application and then enact your own version of it without us starting the process from square one, which we can certainly do, but I'd have to submit it as a text amendment, refer it to CROG, we're talking 60 days out. So if you want to do it that way, you can, but I think if you want to do something with it tonight, you have to approve a modified version of the originally submitted application, which can be what I wrote as a starting point, or can be some modification of that, provided it's along those same lines that Ken outlined earlier. I just want to make one other point as far as how some of what's in what I wrote got there. The first part is 25,000 square feet is a number that is contemplated within the general commercial zone. So it's where that baseline came from. Also, the originally submitted application talks about uses, but it doesn't specifically talk about zones. And manufacturing, medical laboratories, wholesale, and distribution are all uses currently allowed within the general commercial zone. And so that was never the subject of a discussion. It was never the subject of any concerns raised. And so the modification, as I wrote it, tailors the moratorium specifically to the IID so that nothing is unchanged. That zone does not change, and we're not limiting currently allowable development in those zones by the IID. Not to say you can't, but that's how that got there.
Thank you, Mike.
Mr. Vidic has raised his hand a couple times. We've not called on him.
Well, I understand that, Richard, but I'm chair of the meeting and we're in
I
our
know.
deliberations right now. And while I appreciate Mr. Vidic's input and we'll seek to get that in, we're trying to get through the commission's input. Thank you.
Okay.
Janet, you had your hand up?
Well, I was going to make a motion to accept Mike's changes to the moratorium, with the understanding that, if an acceptable proposal comes through, we can, waive the moratorium or whatever in the future. But I think we should accept it at this time.
Motion to accept the moratorium as provided and edited by the CEO. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Jerry seconds it. Any further discussion? Okay, we're gonna seek a vote since it's been seconded. All those in favor, and I'm gonna do this by a head count. All those in favor of accepting the moratorium edited by the CEO, say aye. Mark,
No,
or give me your vote. We'll go that way. I'm sorry.
no,
Mark is no. Excuse me. I have to go. Alex,
Yes.
Nord,
No.
Jeff,
No.
Richard,
No,
Catherine, Catherine, we'll see if we can come back to Catherine. Jerry,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes. Here's Catherine, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I vote yes on the moratorium. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That makes it 5 yeses, 2, 3, 4, and 4 noes for the commission. So it has passed to put the 9-month moratorium in. And with the edits, the full edits that Mike has put together. This is a little out of the norm, but I will ask Mr. Vidic, you have your hand up. Are you on mute? There you are. You're on mute, sir.
I just want to mention that I agree with the way that Mike modified it. I think it's completely appropriate, just so that you know that I concur with the modifications to that moratorium as it was proposed, just so that there's no question that I'm supportive of the modifications.
Thank you. And since I spoke with Mr. Vidic, Steve. Rotalakis. Got it right.
Hey, great,
Rotalakis.
thanks. You got it right. Since I'm the one most affected by this, my only thoughts are that I'm expecting the commission to endeavor in good faith to change the zoning in that district, to come up with allowable uses that fit the current needs of the community, as well as things that are economically viable, because your current zoning bylaw doesn't work.
Is that it?
Well, and the only thing I would say is you told me 2.5 years ago you were going to do this. I know we were in the middle of a pandemic, but it didn't get anywhere. And my suggestion, just going back to what was discussed earlier, was that I'm not sure you can tackle this if you meet by Zoom and you meet once a month. Those are my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mike, you'll get that written up and submit it to the powers that be?
Yes, we'll do the legal notice of decision and get that all finalized.
CROG and NECOG and everything also?
We already did those referrals. We don't need to notify them of the decision.
Oh, I thought they don't care what we do. They just want to know ahead of time. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I would ask, going into new business, I would ask, in order to get Ken moving from a long day in court and moving off, I would ask for a motion for a new business item of discussion on the short-term rental regulations.
Janet, so moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Alex seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Thank you. Okay. So the Ken's been going to class, and he attended a couple conferences, and part of our discussion when he and Mike and I met regarding the moratorium and such, is the nature of, and if I don't want to steal any of Ken's thunder here, but really the nature of planning and zoning, its responsibilities and its authority, its purview when it comes to short-term rentals. Kind of the use of the land versus who owns it, how it's developed and such outside of, our own regulations and things like that. So I'm doing a really poor job on this. So I'll go over to Ken and it really came about when we started discussing primary residence. Well, it kind of turns into, who are we to say as planning and zoning, who is a primary resident? or what is a primary resident? Are we legislating something that's beyond our purview when it comes to that? We regulate the land, we don't regulate the owner, is the thing. So, Ken, with that very poor introduction, did you want to enter in some discussion?
No, that wasn't a poor introduction at all. I mean, that you encapsulated one of the most fundamental elements of zoning is that it's not based on the owner, but based on the land. And approvals run with the land and not with the owner. And there's really, one exception can be under the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Fair Housing Act. An accommodation could be given to somebody. A variance, for example, ordinarily cannot be applied. There was a famous case where a variance was granted to, happened to be an very old woman who wanted to have a variance, I believe, to have a walkway of some sort. And they granted it to her, and that was overturned because the commission, this was a ZBA, but a ZBA was not authorized to condition a variance based on the particular owner. Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act changes that and allows for federal law to sort of supersede that basic requirement. But if it weren't for the federal law on that, the requirement would stand. And so the one instance, somewhat coincidentally, the one instance where ownership can come into play in terms of regulation is if the way in which the land is actually used is tied to the way that the person using it has an ownership interest, and that is a short-term rental. If a short-term rental has it for a defined relatively short period of time, there's an understanding, and it's a very, very early in the development of the law in this area, but there's a general recognition that the nature of that use is a little bit different than, people are going to tend to have events. People don't have, they're going to have people in there. They're going to be socializing in a manner that's not the same thing as a regular single family residence where those kinds of activities happen, rarely, if at all. So that really gave rise to the short-term rental concept. And it doesn't depend on exactly who owns it, but the nature of the right to use the land is for a very short period of time. Now, what your regulations do in this my concern is less to do with the actual definition of primary residence per se. It's then looking at it in the context of your short-term rental regulations that in the RA zone, the only people who could do short-term are people where it's their primary residence. I think that's vulnerable to challenge because the use, it doesn't matter who owns the land, it's how it's being used. So most short-term rental regulations are defining it so that it targets the use and not exactly how it's owned. And so your primary residence requirement, what's the difference if the person is that home is used and lived in by that homeowner for 180 plus days versus someone who does not, when we're talking about your regulation of the persons who are going to be there for a very short period of time. So my recommendation is it's less about I have less of a quarrel actually adopting the single family definition. Right now, you don't have it defined. So what's going to happen is a court would look, if this was challenged, would look to common definitions and to try to find what primary use is. So you already have that protection of just basic common usage in place. You don't need to have this definition. If you wanted to adopt it while the regulations say what they do, I don't have a real problem with that either, frankly. My bigger problem is a recommendation that you take a look at your short-term rental regulations in their totality and modify them so that they focus on the short-term use and don't hinge ever on who happens to own the land or how how long the person who owns the land is residing in the home. That really doesn't change the temporary short-term rental use one way or the other. And there are, just the last thing I would add is, I mean, these things are evolving, so there are more and more towns that have adopted these regulations, and we'd have, you know, some examples of ways to do that we could share with the commission if the commission wanted to consider doing that. So one option would be to just simply table this in the context of taking a closer look at your short-term rental regulations, because it's not like you're tremendously vulnerable right now, because, you know, primary residence, there are ways in which that can be determined without a definition. And then now I'm going to just undercut what I just said and said, if your commission wants to go ahead and have a hearing and adopt this, there's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't change my overarching concern that the actual short-term regulations that exist do tie them to primary, prohibit them to people who are not primary residents. And I think that regulation is subject to challenge, and that might be that might raise a problem with you in the future. And I would recommend that you fix it.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Janet.
yeah, I'm not muted. May I ask a question?
Yes.
One of the reasons we put that in was trying to discourage corporations from purchasing up our homes and renting them out. Do you have any comment on that or suggestions?
Well, I mean, as long as you go in with your eyes wide open that I've given you this advice that the regulation is subject to challenge, I mean, somebody's going to have to challenge it at some point. So if you wanted to ride the wave out with the way that it is, I think it's vulnerable, because based on what you're saying is you didn't want corporations to buy up the land. Well, that's exactly what zoning is not supposed to care about. It doesn't matter whether it's owned by an LLC or it's owned by Mrs. Smith or whomever. It's how the land is being used. That's the only purview that you have, is to regulate the way land is being used. So it could be owned by a corporation and being rented for single family use, long-term rent, lovely couple who works at FedEx and raise the family there, renting for years and years, when it turns out it's owned by XYZ LLC with some investors out of Greenwich. What matters is Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who live there, are using it as a single family home, and are renting it in that fashion. And that's what you regulate. And what's happened with short-term uses is short-term rentals, there's impacts on neighborhoods that are different than a longer-term rental. So most regulations are focusing only on that use and not on the ownership. If you wanted to discourage it by keeping it here, maybe that's going to work. And maybe, folks that are, not going to be residents will look away from Ashford and won't challenge the regulation at all if you leave it that way. I'm just it wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't point out the fact that goal of making sure that companies don't own property or non-residents don't own the property is actually not a valid zoning purpose. But that doesn't mean people aren't going to open up the regs, see it says there, and say, I'm not going to bother doing this in Ashford. It's not my, I don't want to put up that fight there. And you'll accomplish your goal, even though technically I think it's not appropriate.
Ken, Ken, I have a quick question. So one of the reasons why I think in application defining primary residence is not actually a big issue, or something that I personally think the commission really needs to do, is because even if we had a definition and regulated it or didn't at all, our short-term rental regulations, specifically for unhosted rentals, limit the total frequency of these rentals to not more than 3 times during any 6-month period. And so if you're an LLC and you don't want to live there, you'd be limited to 6 times per year, which I think effectively removes the financial incentive that the commission's concerned about. But as far as you're aware or concerned, we are not, there's not that same level of exposure in limiting the frequency that any short-term rental can occur, right?
As far as we know so far. I mean, the law is very early in its development. So I would be foolish to predict whether or not how a court's going to come down on a balancing line. But as it stands right now, there's nothing that would suggest that that's inappropriate. So I think that's fine.
So Ken, let me just restate what you're saying.
Why?
We can limit the number of short-term rentals over a certain period of time in our regulation. And that's not going to go up against any of the challenges. For instance, as you point out, if you can only rent it out 3 times in a 6-month period of time, you're not going to have someone buying it as an investment. It simply wouldn't pay off for them.
We don't know yet whether, I'm confident that if you adopted a regulation that said, I'll be extreme in my example, that said that short-term rentals are not allowed on any property owned by a corporation or an LLC.
Or
that regulation would be tremendously vulnerable.
Or an individual.
I'm sorry, we were talking over each other there for a second.
Or an individual. It doesn't have to be a corporation or an LLC. It could be a person that lives in Ellington, a different town.
Right. But when my example was, there's sometimes I can tell you I'm very confident something will get overturned. Then there's some new ground, and the short-term rental regulations, there's only been one case that's been reported so far in Connecticut. So this is very new ground. So there's nothing yet that says that the limits on the number of times that your regulations say are inappropriate. But I also can't say that they're appropriate either, because that kind of temporal limitation on the number of the year hasn't been decided yet by the courts. But as of right now, I have no reason to tell you right now that that's problematic. I think they're, as of right now, they're fine under the law, the number of limitations that you have in there. But you do have the section that says you're not allowed unless you're the primary resident in certain single families.
It's interesting. It seems like, just like affordable housing, it's in a state of flux. I called up a article I was looking at from 2019 out of Dutchess County in Arkansas or something like this. And a lot of what you're talking about is in here, but a lot of it, does discuss that, what you can or cannot do when it comes to zoning. And there's almost a disclaimer in every paragraph saying that, there's been no court case on this yet. So like you said, we can't say you can't do it, but we can't say what you have is going to be appropriate going forward.
So all I want to do is just let you folks know that if you could write it out the way that it stands, that would discourage other people who are not actual primary residents, and adopting the regulation that defines primary residence, frankly, you should do if you're going to ride that wave and leave it as is. The other alternative would be to adopt the definition, because the definition has might have a function, but then take another look at your short-term rental regulations in light of what some other towns are doing, and potentially avoid that risk that it's tied, at least with respect to single families, it's tied to primary residence. And then the third option would be to just put a pause on it right now, and just look at the thing together, so that if you're going to adopt the definition, you do it in the context of potential other changes. But I don't feel strongly against adopting the regulation the way it's drafted and the way it's in front of the commission. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that that tied with other aspects of the regulations could prove problematic because it ties the use to in part to ownership.
Luther, you had something?
Yeah, I just, my 2 cents is that if we're exposing the town to potential cost and challenge, to what end? If it's likely inappropriate to discriminate against ownership, then it seems as though we should just not have that language in the regulations at all and eliminate the potential for, cost and time sink and all of the other things. I think that Attorney Slater's comments about regulating use instead of regulating ownership are excellent. And I think that would be really intelligent course of action for the commission.
Thank you, Luther. And again, Ken, thank you very much for the input on that. Did you have any other comment? Because I know it's been a long day for you.
No, nothing else. I just thought would be, it was, I looked at those regulations a while ago and didn't fully understood the context of them in the short-term rental. They were just definitions of primary residence. And then as we got more deeply into it, it raised the other issues. So I just wanted to share it. Your commission's educated and experienced, so you can run with the ball from here if you don't have any other questions for me. And then I'd be happy to help if the commission does opt to want to take a deeper dive in that. I can work with Mike and the commission to aid you in that.
I think we'll probably take you up on that. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Have a great night, everyone.
You too.
Thank you.
And to that end, with what we were having for a discussion on that, when it came to, as we said, when we started to get into the weeds with, especially with the definition for primary residence, and a lot of the feedback we got was from some of the lake commission, lake associations as to what constitutes, what does not constitute. And that's when Ken actually quite timely came back from some conferences that he had regarding short-term rentals and what can be. I think we've gone as far as we're willing to into regulating the use on this. My concern is that if we start making any changes to this at this point, I think we have a bare bones primary residence definition. We've got the timeframes identified, which offer some protection for the town, if you will. But when it gets into some of the enforceable items, I do know that there was an email that came through, not an official complaint, but just an email and an anecdotal, unsubstantiated, that one of the residents had been rented from December till July 9 times. And I have no idea how that is, again, been made. What's the evidence that it was 9 separate occasions, 9 separate people? It wasn't someone's brother or uncle coming for a visit or something like this, which does not fall under the rental situation. And we have no way of enforcing that, and we are not the enforcers on that either. We will respond to a complaint. We'll put it in the file. I started to do a little bit of looking when it came to finding the residents on a Verbo site or an Airbnb, and it doesn't show the past history of its rental. It only shows going forward. Now, I'm not the best person to look at it that way on the computer, but it just didn't seem to give us an availability to do enforceable situations. We can use it as a deterrent, but to use it as enforcing, it might not be the right methodology for us. So I'm not looking for a motion on anything to change unless someone has something that they want to offer up. I think we're, like I said, I was very happy with the efforts that Janet and Mark did on these short-term rentals to get us a leg up on a lot of communities. I think going back and looking at them in comparison to some of the other communities now, I even think the material I'm looking for from 2019 is a little bit dated as to what the actual situations are now. So it's probably something, since we implemented in 21, it's probably something for us to look at and getting some information from Ken and other communities locally to see what we can do to share those up without, again, opening ourselves up to possible litigation for the town, as Luther mentioned. Any input? Further discussion? Okay, thank you. Okay, going on to the last item on unfinished business, we're going to be discussing as a invited guest, Loretta Roble from the Conservation Commission. Loretta had asked to be on the agenda to start discussing some of the POCD changes and updates that we're looking to do. Again, we've got, well, for the year, it's 18 months. I think it's due by June usually of that year. So we have in the range of somewhere between 18 and 24 months for our POCD. And obviously it's generated a lot of interest. Loretta, do you have any opening comments or statements that you wanted to have for us, or what your thoughts are?
Yeah, I wanted to just report on what we talked extensively about at our last Conservation Commission meeting, in terms of we were comparing what had gone on with the 2005 POCD and the last one, the 2015. And those of us who were on the 2005 committee talked about how it really took a while. I mean, we really talked with a lot of people and spent a lot of time looking at what is Ashford and what do we really want. And the people who are knowledgeable about various areas came and spent some time with us on the committee. We had a couple of people who were full-time POCD experts doing all this. And it was a real process. And one part of the process was we did a survey that we submitted to the town about asking certain questions. And what we thought as a commission is that it would be a really good idea to do that again and to start early with this. So it didn't happen like we had to ask for an extension the last POCD. And so it was rather rushed. And when you do things rather rushed, of course, you don't have the time to really flush out what you need. So we were thinking that it would be helpful to be proactive about this. And there's a couple of people on our commission who have done surveys before who would be willing to help work out a survey different than what we had before, with some similarities, maybe making it easier so people could fill it out and be wanting to fill it out. And we're just offering our services to assist in whatever way we can, because I think one of the things that we want to avoid with this new POCD or revision, the 2025 revision, is to have things in place that reflect what the residents of the town are interested in. We don't want to wait till there's an issue and found out, like with the mega warehouses, that a lot of people had very strong feelings about it. So we're thinking that we would be willing to help, number one, and that a survey, compiling some sort of a survey, would give a lot more input to your commission or your committee who is working on this, in terms of what our residents really want and how do we update our POCD to reflect what's going on right now as compared to what was going on in 2015 or what was going on in 2005. So that's about it. That's what we wanted to let you know and inform you about all that. And as I recall, I think there were maybe at the 2005, there were maybe a core group of 10 to 12 people who were actually working on writing up the document, but they had received a lot of information from a lot of people within the town. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can
Yes,
jump on that.
Go ahead, Dick.
We basically reached out to like conservation for their input to that section of the POCD. We did the same with, the respective people that would represent each of the other areas. There was, dependent upon the meeting, and we met probably every week or two in the senior center we would have anywhere from 6 to 10 people show up for the meetings. That pretty much the bulk of the writing was done by NECOG. We had a intern from NECOG that helped immensely with the assemblage of, because there's many charts in the POCD, and they're the keepers of all those charts. But we really didn't have any surveys done, as I recall, but we asked each of the parties that would be interested in different areas, to submit what items they were concerned about. And I would think that, one of as far as setting up the process to go forward, and it's good that we're doing this now instead of waiting for the last minute, like was done for 2015.
Right.
But what you really need to do is to get somewhere between 6 and 10 people that will agree to, roll up shirt sleeves and meet periodically to start developing this, and then reaching out to, each of the parties that have the greatest interest in each of the sections. There wasn't a whole lot of effort done, and maybe that could be done differently for this next go around of trying to get cross fertilization of the sections. So conservation would have something to say about economic development or vice versa. So it wouldn't be just done in silos. But, I would say, Jeff, the number one thing, and I'm not volunteering again for this, but you really need to get someone identified that's willing to step up and take the lead on pulling this all together. And you need to figure out if someone from NECOG is willing to work with us as far as the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, I was thinking about that myself. Not to put you on the spot, Mike, I'm just curious, is POCDs part of our menu with Tyche?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly part of the work that we do for towns. So it's just, would be a matter of, we would have to just kind of come up with a schedule, I guess, and we would do this sort of little by little as sort of an in-house thing. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's part of the work that we do for other towns. We're doing one in Madison right now. We're doing Old Saybrook. We've done several.
Excellent. Luther, your
Mike.
hand's up.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so I wanted to start by thanking Loretta for taking the time out to come in and bring her considerations to the commission. I think it's good advice. I think it's well-placed intent. And I think it would behoove the commission to engage with all of the advisory commissions that the town benefits from. There's conservation, there's EDC, there's the Agriculture Commission. There's people that are engaged and care about the town on different levels. And I think, to Dick's point, it would be really smart to have collective involvement and not just siloed, specialized, cherry-picked knowledge, and that those people form sort of a working group of knowledge that they can bring to the table throughout the process. I mean, that's something I think that the commission would benefit from on more of our general work, is sending out to these advisory groups that the town has access to for input. It doesn't mean that we have to act on it, but by not seeking out the information from intelligent people, well-intentioned people in town, we limit ourselves. And I think we should be as inclusive as possible on that front. And also, I think it'd be great to build off the learnings that we've had in the exercise for the affordable housing project, where we got a lot of experience in compiling surveys, interpreting results, and leveraging that data to try to drive a direction. And with the technology that we have available to us with SurveyMonkey and with other pieces of technology, we would have a really good opportunity to generate some information on a townwide basis with little cost. And, you know, if the questions were written appropriately, probably some really great information.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me jump in. Jeff, probably the first thing you need to identify is who's going to lead this thing. When I was doing it, it was a pretty all-consuming activity, and I had a couple of people that worked tirelessly on pulling it together, but we had to literally like pulling hen's teeth, getting the various stakeholders in different areas to actually come to the meetings and submit what they felt was important. So, and we also had to contend with the resources at NECOG. So if Mike and his team can bring the same type of resources that we had from NECOG, I would fully endorse his group doing that, because there's no way the town can access all those maps and data that NECOG was able to access. So I'm assuming, Mike, you can access the same data. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's most of that data is available publicly from state portals, and I have, you know, some of the stuff we've already got from NECOG, you know, so that there's nothing that they have that we wouldn't already have access to.
Okay, so on that sense, since we have Mike and his group already on board, I would recommend that we work with them rather than NECOG directly. But then, Jeff, you need to identify someone that's going to lead this effort. I think Mike Gantic had reached out to you at one point. I don't know if Mike's not on the call, I don't think tonight, but you know, maybe he was active in the last one. Maybe talk with him and see if between the two of you guys, you can come up with someone that wants to lead the effort.
Sure, yeah, and I know Mike especially through OTOF has been, you know, very active with, we've done the leadership meetings and things like that, identifying other strategic priorities. That has been very, very helpful. It's just a matter of moving forward. We were hoping to have a meeting following up this summer, but I think in talking with Bill Folletti, we moved it to the fall, so it'll be sometime in September. We'll have a follow-up to the leadership meeting that we had. I saw some hands up too. I just want to touch base. Catherine Silversmith, you're muted, Catherine.
You'd think I'd know better by now. I just want to say that I definitely agree with Luther on being able to pull in from all the different groups. When it comes to Tyche, Mike, what have you done in other towns? Have you actually been active in pulling the information together?
Yeah, I mean, we've done basically start to finish mapping, drafting, survey prep, meeting, moderation, visioning. I mean, we've done basically all of it. There are some towns that we've been hired just to write the POCD.
All right. Well, we already have a foundation in what we have in our POCD. This is a matter of expanding it and updating the status of the things that we have been working on. So I'm looking forward to this, and I want to be involved as I'm allowed to be. And I'm going to be encouraging the public to get involved. And they're going to need to know who to contact from the various groups so that they can act as their spokesman.
And
yeah.
Jeff, I hate to jump in because I know Loretta's waiting patiently as well, but Catherine set me up so brilliantly there that I think from my perspective, I think it's important that the ownership, leadership, and direction for this process is squarely landed with planning and zoning. You know, this is a planning and zoning
Yes.
initiative and responsibility. And I believe very strongly that inclusion is important in all of this, but I would not be supportive of diluting the role that planning and zoning owns with this effort in terms of leadership and ownership of the process.
Thank you,
From,
Richard.
from a legal viewpoint, if one goes to the state regulations of the duties of planning and zoning, it sits squarely on planning and zoning that they are responsible for developing the POCD. That it
That's
means
correct.
that the approval of it rests on the Planning and Zoning Commission. But again, the key item here, Jeff, is I was not on planning and zoning when I spearheaded this effort years ago. I'm on planning and zoning now, but the leader of this does not necessarily have to be a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but the final approval of this needs to be with planning and zoning. And as I recall, Jeff, you were at a number of these meetings back in 2015. Matter of fact, I think you were, very actively participating.
So was Alex, for that matter, Alex Castillo.
Yep. And Bill Darcy was another one that was strongly involved. But someone either on planning and zoning or from wherever one finds that is got to be the driving force that pulls together the meetings and makes sure that people shows up for the meetings. And it was a major effort on my part. And I would, again, I'm not volunteering for it a second time, but I spoke with a person that did the 2005, and then her name eludes me at the moment, but she indicated to me at the same time that it was a very large job for her too. So work with whoever you need to work with to identify who's going to be leading the meetings and pulling it together.
Loretta.
Yeah, I just again want to reiterate how the time is right now for us to get some sort of a working group together to look at all this. And it is a very important document. I think all of us found that out in working through all this text amendment situation of it really does form the foundation for the way our town works and how it proceeds. And I don't think most people knew about even having a POCD and the importance of it prior to the whole text amendment thing, when a lot of people who talked mentioned that. And so then people were asking, well, what is this document and all that? So I think it's a good time to think about this and begin the work on it. And Dick Williams, I know you worked a lot on that. It's a lot of work. It's a really important document. It covers all facets of our town and it takes a lot of effort. And I do think there are a lot of people now in the town who really want to take the effort to do that because they see that if you don't participate, then things might happen that you might not like. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to come and urge you to start thinking about beginning the process and getting started on this so that we don't have that deadline staring us in the face and saying, oh, we've got to get it done. Because I think in order to do it well and to look at what's happening now and what we've learned about our town, to put that in this document. And we've got a couple of other active groups that we didn't have before. Our Town, Our Future, very active. Luther's on the Ag Committee that has done a lot. And so that we have a lot of experts in our town and to really use them. That doesn't mean they necessarily need to be on the committee, but we need to make sure we gather up all of who we need to have this really represent the diversity of our town in all the different aspects. And I like, Dick, what you said about, you know, conservation and economic development, working together. So we come up with a best plan for the town. You know, you can't just have conservation. You can't just have economic development. There has to be some sort of a marriage of that, and you work it out. And that's how you do that in meetings and discussing to come up with a rich solution. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, your hand's up.
I just have one more comment. I believe that part of the process, and you'll have to refresh my memory, I actually worked on with a group on the original plan of conservation and development. So it's been a long time since we've come a long way since then. But I believe it also needs to be presented to the town. And I can't remember if it requires town approval, but I think it does.
Yeah.
So it's not just a P&Z decision. It is the P&Z puts it forth upon your approval to the town for the town's consideration. Is that correct?
As best I recall, Catherine, no, it's not. This is strictly.
I'll check it. I'll find out.
It's the P&Z approves it. It's presented at a public hearing so the town can make comments, but the town does not vote on it.
Okay.
And I'm
So
not
when it's
exactly-
presented, when it's presented at the public hearing, if I understand correctly, P&Z would need to take those comments seriously.
Right, we seek the
Not just pull
input
ahead.
from the public, correct.
All right, very good.
It's just like the regulations. The town does not vote on the regulations. P&Z.
No, I understand that. Dick, you don't have to teach me that. Thank you.
And I do want to mention one also piece that if people are or are not familiar, those people that are on the call and the commission members, at the back of which was a different piece that was put together from the 2015, from the 2005 original, it talks about plan implementation. And I can say I've been lax on this, and I apologize. I will say also that when we did do the 2015 POZ, I had been chairman for less than a year when it was dumped on me because my predecessor did jack on it before that. So, you know, that was one of the reasons why we were in a time crunch to try and get this in. But one of the things we did put in, and we've said frequently, is that trying to make it a living document. Not make it something that, okay, we're coming up on 10 years, it's time for us to look at it again. And in doing so, what we did was we identified objectives, and in the objectives, there were 1 or 2 actionable items to take place to try to achieve those objectives. And then at the back, we identified not so much an assignment, but identified who we thought would be a potential responsible party for following through on those objectives and those actionable items. So if you do have the opportunity, you know, you can go back and you can see, you know, we've got you know, BOS, BOF, OTOF, planning and zoning, public works, you know, the groups are identified. There's a legend in the front, luckily, because I was trying to remember every abbreviation we had there. Conservation Commission, you know, it's amazing when you look at it that there are multiple groups. You know, when you talk about housing, there are 1, 2, 3, there's 4 groups in housing. It's not just Housing Authority to try and take care of the issues in there and the actions. Even under agriculture, besides the Ag Commission, Conservation Commission, OTOF, Board of Finance, Planning and Zoning, Region 19. I mean, it's a village, if you will, to steal a term from many years ago. It does take a number of groups to meet a number of the actionable items that were identified. So I think it's a good exercise. I think we need to follow through on it. I think we need to get updates going forward from that point. And I think that's part of it too. I think we need to get updates as to what's in there now, actionable, what's been done. And I know Mike Gatnick has been looking at some of these things as to what have we done? What have we been successful with? What have we not done? And what were the obstacles to getting to that? And maybe we needed to shift gear. Maybe we can't go through the mountain. Maybe we need to go around the mountain or something like that in order to achieve those goals. So again, that's just something that's in the current plan. It's good to look at. It'd be a good reference. It's kind of the cliff notes of actionable items to get things done and to move forward with the planning and zoning, as opposed to just the narratives. I don't think a lot of the narratives have changed. I think some of them need some tweaking, but the narratives are pretty much the narratives. A lot of the maps and such are the same. It's really when it comes to those things we want to see change or those things we want to move forward with. A plan of conservation and development is really what it is. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I literally wrote that section, so it would be more than just a bunch of narratives. And we iterated on it quite a few times at the meetings we had. Mike Gantic has been very good as far as trying to follow through on the status of whether those things have been done. But that was not present in the 2005 POCD.
Oh, no, you're talking the narratives or the implementation plan?
No, that thing you just referenced, the back in the back of it.
Yeah, the plan of implementation. Yes, correct. I mentioned that. I said that it wasn't part of the 2005. It was something new to the 2015 to get things moving forward.
Yeah, and I personally physically wrote all that and with inputs from other people, but it was quite a job to identify all the different parties that would have input to it. And surprisingly, a lot of those objectives have been acted upon, but there's not been, to my knowledge, a document produced that gives the status of what has been done and what has not been done. And that would probably be the first task for this group that does the next one, is to identify what the statuses are.
Right, because that way we can take care of the old, and then with the survey, we can take care of the new moving forward. Okay. Loretta, I want to thank you for your joining us and getting on the schedule and your earnest efforts to help us to move forward with this. It is working in conjunction, I think, very much with some of the reg changes we'll be putting in place. So I think that's a timely issue, and it gives us some more gravitas for getting it done and getting it in place. And I'm sorry, Christine, you had your hand up. I missed that. You're on mute.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sorry, I wasn't sure I could say anything, but I know Luther mentioned SurveyMonkey and stuff. I think it's really important to get as many people to answer a survey as possible. And if you limit it to an online thing, you're going to drop the participation rate. The last survey for 2004 only had 19% rate of response. That's pretty low. I think we need to keep it simple, stupid survey and send it to every mailing address with a self-addressed stamped envelope, just to get as big a response as we can and keep it simple, stupid. Okay, so that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so again, thank you, Loretta, for joining us and bringing this up as a very important topic. And I think you've got full agreement from us. To that end, the zoning officer's report. Michael, you have anything for us?
Nothing specific. I know you'd mentioned in the beginning of the meeting about an update on the virtual meetings.
Yes.
But I think you more or less covered what you and I talked about. There's some technology that needs to be added to that main meeting room. There have been some hybrid quote unquote meetings that have happened, but they largely have not occurred with a large number of people attending remotely as well as in the room, and the types of interactions that happen with this board, with public hearings and presentation of materials virtually or in person, necessitates, I think, a little bit more tech than what we have currently. So the status of that, I would defer to the first selectman and Savage, which is the town's IT vendor. But because we have public hearings, the requirements under the statute basically obligate us that if we are going to have a hybrid meeting, the folks that are attending via Zoom have to have all the same rights and privileges and be able to consume the information in the same way at the same time as someone in the room. So if we have an applicant who shows up with an easel, that easel has to be something that we can then capture with a camera and make it so that someone attending via Zoom can see what that easel says and can interact and speak and listen all in real time. They can't sort of be marginalized in any way. And the PZC is, I think, quite different than a lot of the other boards in the way in which those hearings and those applications occur. So there needs to be some additional tech put into that room for us to have a qualifying hybrid meeting that would serve us well if we were to need to kind of conduct that officially, particularly with some of the meetings we've had recently. I mean, we don't even have the capacity to handle 200 plus people kind of in that space. So we've got to, unfortunately, we can't reverse engineer that. So I don't know that 200, they don't, most of them, I guess, don't call me ahead of time and say, hey, I'm coming to your public hearing. So I don't know that 200 people are going to show up until they're there. And we need to have the tech to be able to accommodate that regardless of how many people. So I guess that's why what we have now doesn't really work for the PZC, while it might work for other boards, but the specific status I would defer to the first selectman.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, weighing in on what Mike just said. When I first was active or elected into the PZT, I don't think the number of outside parties that attended the meetings numbered more than 1, 2, or 3. Paul Varga was one of the people that attended quite frequently, but we had never had anywhere near the kinds of attendance that we've had, is spurred on by this mega warehouse thing. Until that's put to bed, I don't see any way that we're going to have an in-person meeting supersede what we're doing right now. So I'd say we're probably better off just sticking with what we've got at the moment.
Well, that's how, you know, I know we've got some differing opinions. I've been approached by a number of people, and it included during our hearings that we're having about and the hoops that Mike jumped through to try and make sure that not only was he running our meetings and our hearings, but also accommodating people for in-person attendance of those hearings, if they, for one excuse or another, didn't want to be on the phone or didn't have the technology available to them, and we made that available to them. There's a lot of hoops to jump through in doing that. And for that matter, you know, for any of the chairs who are looking to do hybrid meetings and the vice chairs or whatever, they would need to be familiar with the technology also. So there'd be some training that needs to take place. So not so near future, but it would be great to have some meetings that allow us to do that. As I was talking with Mike, I had said, you know, and similar to what Dick just said, you know, maybe 1 or 2 of our meetings over the course of a year might require more than 6 people in attending or being able to accommodate 6 people. Whereas now, easily over half of our meetings, more like 8 to 9 of them, it seems, per year, have 20 or 25 more in attendance. And I think it's a great thing. I think it's great to get people involved, to get the input, but we have to be able to accommodate them. We have to be able to accommodate the needs of the members too, to be sure that they have the technology that they need if we have the hybrid situation. But I think it'd be great if we could draft a memo to the selectman's office, to the first selectman, stating our request, our hope to get to the hybrid meeting schedule. And maybe Mike and I can sit down and identify some of the technology that's needed, or estimating some of the technology that's needed to allow us to do that and accommodate some of the groups that we have available that attend our meetings. Yes, Catherine.
sorry to weigh in on this. Mike, I would also be very, very willing to work with you to lay out the technology needs in a clear fashion so that all of the selectmen would understand them.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And one important or what I find to be an interesting data point is our big Cadillac public hearing that we had on the text amendment application was viewed, according to YouTube, over 300 times, that recording. So we are get these recordings, and people have become very used to that ability to consume this information when they're comfortable. And so from a record perspective, we got to make sure that we continue to provide the recordings in such a way that we're capturing what we are capturing now. But I'm happy to do whatever I need to do to urge that forward. If there's anything else, I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Nord.
What is the status on the 2 blighted properties that are in town here? Is any progress being made on remediating those 2 blighted properties?
I can take that. I think, well, the short answer is it's complicated because we don't have blighted properties because we don't have a blight code. If we had a blight code, we'd be well on our way. We have had a couple of meetings internally with the various code-based organizations, building, health, fire, zoning, to identify what the best and most efficient and concise path forward is based upon the violations that may or may not be there. And we're working through those. We've reached out to some property owners in certain instances to try to informally get some compliance before we have to make things more complicated and start dragging Ken to more meetings and asking him more questions. So we're working on it. And we're trying to get those items resolved to the extent we can with the codes that we have.
Yeah, Nord, you're referring to the property kind of near the fire station and our unofficial gravel pit?
No, I'm referring to the Mead property, which is the burned out building. And there's a messy building that's across from the transfer station.
I actually think Mike has an even more complete list than that, but yeah, I think those are a couple identified on the list.
I think that's more of a built-in official issue or selectman issue than it is a planning and zoning issue. Is that correct?
Well, as Mike said, blight doesn't necessarily fall under zoning. We don't have that, and but he is active with the groups that have some jurisdiction when it comes to codes. As I said, building, health, fire, and for that matter, what is proper zoning, what is not, what's allowed in the areas. So they're working on it as a group, from what I understand, along with the assessor and a number of members on that team.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else for Mike? Okay, with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
You got it.
Jerry motions, second.
Aye.
Second by Jeff Schillinger. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. We have a number of things to be working on besides the regs and the POCD. As Dick brought up, affordable housing. We'll try and get an update on that. And also some of our renewable energies, the alternative energies, the solar and such. So we have a number of things to work on. Sorry you couldn't get July off. We normally able to do that, but we're busy people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.